The conference room fell silent the moment the woman standing near the reception desk spoke my name. I'm looking for Emily Carter. My assistant smiled politely. Do you have an appointment with Ms. Carter? The woman hesitated. She looked around the glass walls, the awards displayed in the lobby, the employees walking confidently through the hallway carrying tablets and laptops. Her hands tightened around an old leather purse that had clearly been repaired more than once. No, she answered quietly, but it's important, please tell her her mother is here. I was standing behind the tinted glass of my office, only 20 feet away. She couldn't see me, but I could see every wrinkle on her face, every grey strand in her hair, every nervous movement of the woman who had once looked directly into my eyes and told an entire room full of relatives, Emily is the biggest disappointment I have ever raised. She isn't my daughter anymore. Get out of my house and never come back. 10 years had passed since that sentence. 10 years since I carried one backpack, $143 in cash and nowhere to go. Now she had walked into the headquarters of Carter Urban Development, a company with 486 employees across 3 states, asking for help. And she had absolutely no idea that the woman she was asking to meet was the daughter she had thrown away. I took one slow breath. My assistant looked toward my office, waiting for instructions. I closed my eyes for just a second. Because this story does not start here. Welcome back to Revenge Cold Stories. Drop your first name and your city in the comments and subscribe before we go any further. When people hear that a mother threw her own daughter out of the house, they usually imagine constant screaming, violence, or obvious cruelty. My childhood wasn't like that. It was much quieter, much more confusing. My name is Emily Carter, I'm 34 years old, and for most of my life I believed disappointment was something you could become instead of simply feel. I grew up in a small Ohio suburb where everyone knew everyone else's business before breakfast. My father, Daniel Carter, repaired industrial machines for 28 years. He rarely raised his voice. My mother, Susan Carter, worked as the office manager of a dental clinic. Organized, responsible, respected. From the outside, we looked like the kind of family people wanted. Inside, expectations slowly replaced affection. My older brother, Michael, was the family success story from the beginning. Straight A's. Captain of the basketball team. Scholarship offers before graduation. Teachers loved him. Neighbors admired him. Relatives introduced me as Michael's little sister. Not Emily. Never just Emily. At 8 years old, I won 2nd place in the county science fair. There were 312 students competing. I spent 3 weeks building a working model of a water filtration system using recycled materials. When they announced my name, I searched the crowd for my parents. Dad clapped proudly. Mom smiled for exactly 3 seconds. Then she leaned toward another parent beside her. Michael won 1st place in this competition when he was her age. That sentence followed me home. Not because she meant to hurt me. Because she genuinely believed comparison created motivation. Looking back now, I think she honestly thought she was helping. That was her worldview. Nothing was ever good enough because perfection was always one more step away. If I scored 94, why not 98? If I made the honor rolls, why wasn't I at the top? If someone complimented me, she corrected them before I could enjoy it. Emily has potential, she'd say. She just doesn't apply herself. Those words became part of my identity long before I understood what identity even meant. Dad noticed. Sometimes, late at night, he'd sit beside me while I finished homework. You know your mother wants what's best for you. I'd nod. Because I loved him. But what I wanted to ask was simple. If this is what the best feels like, what does disappointment feel like? The answer came years later. When I was 12, something happened that I didn't fully understand until adulthood. It was my birthday. Mom had invited 23 relatives. The dining room was full. Presents covered the table. Grandma asked me what I wanted to become someday. Before I answered, Mom laughed. Ask her next year. Every week she changes her mind. Everyone laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was casual. Forgettable. Except I never forgot it. Because in that tiny moment, I learned something dangerous. People often don't realize they're humiliating someone. To them, it's conversation. To the person receiving it, it's memory. That birthday became a mirror for the day she would eventually throw me out. Back then I didn't know it. I simply smiled, opened my presents, pretended everything was fine. Michael was different. He wasn't cruel either. He simply accepted the role everyone had given him. The successful child. The reliable son. The future of the family. He wasn't trying to make me feel small. He had simply never experienced what it felt like to be compared every single day. As adults, I understand him much better than I did then. Children often inherit family systems they never created. They mistake them for normal. By high school, I had discovered architecture. While other students doodled names inside notebooks, I filled mine with floor plans. Libraries, schools, affordable housing, entire neighborhoods. At 16, I downloaded free design software onto an old computer that froze every 20 minutes. It didn't matter. I kept designing. By graduation, I had completed 417 digital building concepts. None of them perfect. All of them teaching me something. One afternoon, my drafting teacher asked if he could keep one of my projects as an example for future students. I walked home happier than I had been in months. Mom looked at the drawings for less than 30 seconds. You know architects don't make as much as engineers, right? That was her answer. Not congratulations. Not I'm proud of you. Just another reminder that somewhere, someone else had done better. For years I believed she didn't love me. Now I think the truth was more complicated. She loved achievement. She believed achievement protected people from hardship, because hardship had shaped her own childhood. She grew up poor. Her father lost 3 jobs before she turned 15. She promised herself her children would never struggle financially. The tragedy was that somewhere along the way, she confused love with performance. And I became the child who never performed well enough. I kept trying anyway. I graduated from high school with a 3.91 GPA. Out of 286 students, I ranked 17th. It wasn't valedictorian. It wasn't top 10. To most families, it would have been something to celebrate. To my mother, it became another reminder that I had almost reached my potential. At the graduation dinner, my aunt lifted her glass and smiled. Emily, we're proud of you. 17th in the class is wonderful. Before I could even say thank you, Mom answered for me. It could have been higher if she hadn't wasted so much time drawing buildings. The conversation moved on. Everyone forgot the comment within seconds. I didn't. People often ask when a relationship finally breaks. The truth is, most relationships don't break in a single moment. They erode. One sentence. One comparison. One dismissal. One invisible wound at a time. By the time I left for college, I had become an expert at apologizing for taking up space. I apologized when I succeeded. I apologized when I failed. Sometimes I apologized before anyone had even criticized me. I earned a partial scholarship to study architecture. It covered 60% of my tuition. The remaining costs meant I worked 28 hours a week at a grocery store. Classes during the day. Work at night. Homework after midnight. For 4 years my average sleep was barely 5 hours. Yet those were some of the happiest years of my life. Not because they were easy. Because nobody compared me to Michael. For the first time, professors evaluated my work on its own merit. Professor Helen Brooks changed everything. After reviewing one of my urban housing projects, she looked at me and asked a question no adult had ever asked before. What problem were you trying to solve? Not, why isn't it better? Not, who did it better than you? She wanted to understand my thinking. That single question felt like sunlight after years of standing in the shade. By my senior year, I had completed 86 architectural projects, won 2 regional design competitions, and secured an internship with a respected development firm in Columbus. I called home excited. Dad answered. His voice was warm. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Then he lowered his voice. Your mom says internships don't always turn into jobs, so don't get your hopes up. I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because disappointment had become so familiar that it almost sounded comforting. After graduation, I accepted a junior designer position. Starting salary, $48,000 a year. I rented a tiny apartment, 580 square feet. The kitchen and living room were practically the same room. The heater made strange noises every winter. The ceiling leaked whenever heavy rain lasted more than an hour. I loved that apartment. Every bill I paid felt like proof that I could build a life on my own. Then Dad suffered a mild heart attack. It wasn't fatal, but recovery took months. Medical bills began piling up. Mom was overwhelmed. Michael had recently married and moved almost 300 miles away for work. So every weekend I drove home. 2 hours each way. I bought groceries, cooked meals, cleaned the house, took Dad to physical therapy, never once asking for anything in return. Looking back now, I don't regret those weekends. Kindness doesn't become meaningless just because it isn't appreciated. One Saturday evening, after finishing dinner, I overheard Mom speaking to a neighbor in the backyard. Emily's inside washing dishes. She's sweet, but I honestly worry she'll never become someone people truly respect. I stood there holding a damp towel. She wasn't trying to insult me. She genuinely believed she was expressing concern. That realization hurt even more. Because if someone insults you in anger, at least you know emotion caused it. When someone calmly describes you as a disappointment, they believe it's simply the truth. A year later, my company announced an internal design competition. 114 employees participated. The winning proposal would become the blueprint for a $72 million mixed-use development. I spent 6 weeks preparing. Late nights, early mornings, countless revisions. When they announced the results, my project won unanimously. I became the youngest lead designer in the company's history. I called home immediately. Dad cried. Mom said, "That's nice, Emily." Then, after a pause, "Just remember not to let success make you arrogant." I stared at my phone. I hadn't even celebrated yet. And somehow, I was already being warned about pride. Still, I kept trying. Birthdays, Christmas, Thanksgiving. I showed up. I brought gifts. I listened more than I spoke. Because part of me believed that if I loved my family well enough, eventually they'd see me differently. Then came my 24th birthday. The day everything changed. Mom decided to host a family dinner. 31 relatives came. The dining room was louder than I had ever heard it. Children ran through the hallway. My uncles argued about football. Someone turned old music up too loud. For a while, it actually felt normal. Then Aunt Linda asked me a simple question. "So, Emily, when are we finally going to see one of those famous buildings you've designed?" I smiled. My firm is starting construction on a project next month. Before I could explain further, Mom laughed. Let's not exaggerate. The room grew quieter. Emily works on little pieces of projects, People hear architect and imagine skyscrapers. A few relatives chuckled politely. She continued, honestly, she's always dreamed bigger than her abilities. Nobody intended to humiliate me. Nobody shouted. Nobody defended me either. Because sometimes silence joins the louder voice without realizing it. I tried changing the subject. But Mom wasn't finished. She looked around the table and sighed. I've spent years trying to push Emily toward excellence. Then she smiled in that tired way parents sometimes do. Some children simply refuse to become what they're capable of. The words settled over the room like dust. Invisible. Heavy. Permanent. I looked toward Dad. He lowered his eyes. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair but remained silent. That silence would stay with him for years. I remember staring at the tablecloth instead of looking at anyone's face. It had tiny blue flowers stitched into the fabric. My grandmother had sewn them by hand nearly 20 years earlier. It sounds strange that I remember something so small. But when people experience moments that change their lives, their minds often hold on to ordinary details instead of dramatic ones. The flowers, the smell of roasted chicken, a spoon resting beside an empty plate, the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. Those are the things that stayed with me. Not because they mattered. Because they were the last ordinary things before my life divided itself into two parts. Before and after. A cousin tried to rescue the conversation. So Emily, didn't your company just promote you? I smiled politely. Yes. Before I could say another word, Mom answered again. They gave her more responsibility because people keep quitting. Companies do that. A few people laughed awkwardly. Others looked down. Nobody wanted conflict at a birthday dinner. I understood that. I truly did. Then my uncle asked Michael how work was going. For 15 straight minutes, everyone celebrated his promotion. His salary. His new house. His future plans. I was genuinely happy for him. He had worked hard. He deserved every bit of it. The difference wasn't that Michael received praise. The difference was that I only seemed to exist as a comparison. When the conversation finally returned to me, Mom sighed heavily. I don't know what happened. The room became quiet again. I raised both of my children the same way. She shook her head slowly. One reached his potential. Then she looked directly at me. The other became the biggest disappointment I've ever raised. No one spoke. I don't think anyone knew how. Dad whispered her name. Susan. She ignored him. I've defended Emily for years. That wasn't true. But there comes a point where you have to accept reality. I felt every eye in the room searching for my reaction. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I simply asked one question. What exactly have I done that disappoints you? It was the calmest sentence I'd spoken all evening. Maybe all year. She answered immediately. You settle. I work. You settle. I pay my bills. You settle. I've never asked you for money. You settle. Every answer I gave met the same response. Finally I asked, what would have made you proud? For the first time. She hesitated. Not because she didn't have an answer. Because she had too many. A different career. A different salary. A different personality. A different version of me. The silence stretched until she finally spoke. You should have become extraordinary. I looked around the room. At my father. At Michael. At my grandparents. At cousins who suddenly found the floor fascinating. Then I quietly asked, what if ordinary people deserve love too? No one answered. Mom stood up. If that's truly how you think. She walked toward the front door. Opened it. Pointed outside. Then leave. The room froze. I'm serious. She didn't yell. Her voice stayed calm. If you're satisfied with mediocrity, then you don't belong in this house anymore. Dad stood up. Susan, enough. No. She looked at me again. I've spent 24 years trying to help you. I didn't ask to be compared every day. I'm comparing you to your potential. No. My voice barely rose above a whisper. You're comparing me to an imaginary daughter who never existed. Her face hardened. If you walk out tonight. She paused. Don't come back. Those words landed differently. Everyone knew it. Dad took one step toward me. Then stopped. He looked trapped between protecting his wife and protecting his daughter. It remains one of the saddest images I've ever seen. Michael opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. Still nothing. Years later, he would tell me that silence became the greatest regret of his life. At the time, silence was simply another person choosing not to interrupt the family system. I stood, walked upstairs, packed one backpack, 2 pairs of jeans, 3 shirts, my sketchbook, my laptop, a framed photo of Dad and me from a fishing trip when I was 11. Everything else stayed behind. When I reached the front door, nobody stopped me. Dad was crying. Quietly. Mom stood with her arms folded. Still convinced she was teaching me a lesson. I looked at her one last time. I hope one day you realize I spent my whole life trying to earn something children should never have to earn. She looked away. The door closed behind me. My phone showed exactly $143.17 in my checking account. Outside, the air felt colder than it had an hour earlier. Not because the temperature had changed. Because home no longer existed. I sat inside my old Honda Civic for nearly 40 minutes. I didn't know where to drive. My apartment lease had ended 2 weeks earlier because I had planned to move back temporarily while saving for a down payment on a condo. Every plan I had disappeared in a single evening. Finally, I called the only person I could think of. Professor Helen Brooks. It was almost 10 o'clock. I expected voicemail. Instead, she answered on the second ring. "It's Emily." I tried speaking. Nothing came out. She waited. Then quietly asked, "Where are you?" I gave her the address. She didn't ask what happened. She simply said, "Stay exactly where you are." 43 minutes later, headlights pulled into the driveway across the street. She stepped out carrying 2 paper bags. One held sandwiches. The other held a blanket. She got into my car without saying a word. For several minutes, we just sat there. Then she handed me half of a sandwich. "You should eat before you decide anything." That simple sentence changed more than she ever knew. I wasn't hungry. At least I didn't think I was. But after the first bite, I realized I hadn't eaten since lunchtime. Shock has a strange way of convincing you that your body no longer matters. Professor Brooks didn't ask me to explain. She didn't tell me my mother was wrong. She didn't try to fill the silence with comforting words. Instead, after I finished eating, she asked one quiet question. "What do you need tonight?" Not, "What happened?" Not, "Whose fault is this?" Just, "What do you need?" No one had asked me that in years. Maybe ever. "I don't have anywhere to sleep." She nodded once. "You do now." That night I slept in the guest room of her small brick house. The room wasn't large. There was a bookshelf with old architecture magazines. A wooden desk facing the window. A faded blue quilt folded neatly at the end of the bed. It felt safer than any place I had ever lived. Not because it was luxurious, because nobody expected me to prove I deserved to be there. The next morning she made coffee while I stared out the kitchen window. Finally she spoke. "I won't tell you what to do about your family." I looked at her. "Because that's your decision." She stirred her coffee slowly. "But I will tell you something an architect once told me when I was your age." I waited. "Buildings don't collapse because of one bad brick." She smiled gently. "They collapse because tiny structural problems are ignored for years." At the time, I thought she was talking about architecture. Years later, I realized she had been talking about families. Over the next 6 weeks, I worked harder than I ever had before. Not to prove my mother wrong. At least not anymore. I worked because for the first time my future depended entirely on me. I accepted every project my company offered. Stayed late. Volunteered for difficult assignments. Read industry journals before sunrise. Studied city planning at night. Within 11 months I was promoted again. Salary, $69,000. A year later, $83,000. By the time I turned 27, I had led 12 successful commercial projects and 3 affordable housing developments that won regional design awards. Each achievement felt satisfying. But something unexpected happened. The more successful I became, the less often I thought about my mother. For years I believed success would make the pain disappear. It didn't. It simply made the pain quieter. There's a difference. One afternoon, nearly 3 years after I left home, Dad called from a number I didn't recognize. His voice sounded older, more retired. "I've wanted to call you for months." "I know. I'm sorry." I closed my eyes. "Are you apologizing because you agreed with her?" "No." "Then why?" His answer took several seconds. "Because I didn't protect you." That sentence stayed with me. People often think the deepest wounds come from those who hurt us. Sometimes they come from those who loved us, but stayed silent. Dad told me he and Mom were still together. Michael had 2 children. Grandma's health was declining. Life had continued. Just without me. Before hanging up, he quietly asked, "Can I see you sometime?" I said yes. Not because everything was forgiven. Because relationships don't heal through punishment. They heal through honesty. We met at a small diner halfway between our cities. He looked thinner. His hair had turned almost completely grey. For a while we talked about ordinary things. Work, weather, traffic. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. He placed something on the table. It was the framed fishing photo I thought I'd taken with me. The glass had cracked. The frame was scratched. "I found this in the attic." I frowned. "I thought I packed it." "You did." He looked embarrassed. "Your mother unpacked it after you left." The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because of the picture. Because even after throwing me out, she had removed the one thing that reminded me of him. Dad took a slow breath. "I should have come after you that night." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You should have." He nodded. "I know. No excuses. No explanations. Just truth." It was the first honest conversation we'd ever had. Over the following years, Dad and I rebuilt our relationship one lunch at a time. Slowly, carefully, without pretending the past hadn't happened. Mum never called. Not once. According to Dad, she believed I would eventually come home and apologize. When that never happened, her pride slowly turned into distance, then into silence. Meanwhile, my career continued growing in ways I never imagined. At 29, I became Director of Urban Development. At 31, I partnered with 2 former colleagues to launch our own company. We started with 9 employees in a rented office that barely fit all our desks. The first year our revenue reached $2.8 million. The second year, $8.4 million. By year 5, we had completed 47 major projects, opened 3 regional offices, employed nearly 500 people. What made me proud wasn't the money. It was our hiring policy. Every manager received the same instruction during orientation. No employee will ever have to earn basic respect here. Some people smiled politely when they heard it. Only a few understood why that sentence mattered so much to me. I insisted every junior designer present ideas before senior leadership. I wanted quiet voices to be heard. I praised effort publicly, corrected mistakes privately. Not because I was perfect, because I knew exactly what constant comparison could do to someone's confidence. One Friday afternoon, while reviewing plans for a community housing project, my assistant knocked softly on my office door. "Is Emily?" "Yes. There's a woman at reception asking to speak with the CEO." I told her appointments are required. I barely looked up from my screen. "Okay. She says it's a family emergency." I sighed. "Name?" The assistant checked her tablet, then looked back at me. Her expression changed slightly. "Susan Carter." My hand froze above the keyboard. 10 years. Exactly 10 years. Without a single phone call. Without a birthday message. Without an apology. Now, she had come looking for help. I stood slowly. For a few seconds, I simply looked through the glass wall of my office. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. Life had a way of shrinking people who had spent years believing they were in control. Her coat was neatly pressed but old. The leather strap on her purse had been stitched together twice. She kept glancing toward the elevators, then back to the reception desk, as though she wasn't sure whether she should stay or leave. My assistant walked closer. "Would you like me to tell her you're unavailable?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked a different question. Did she say why she's here? Only that she desperately needs to speak with the company's owner. Owner. The word almost made me smile. 10 years ago, according to my mother, I would never become someone people respected. Now she had come looking for someone she believed could solve a problem too difficult for her to handle. She simply didn't know that person was me. I turned away from the window. "Invite her into conference room 3. My assistant nodded. "And..." She paused. "Should I tell her your name?" "No. Just tell her the CEO will meet with her." She disappeared into the hallway. I remained in my office for another minute. Not because I needed to prepare what I would say. Because I needed to decide who I wanted to be. Revenge had crossed my mind more than once over the years. I won't pretend otherwise. There had been nights when I imagined her recognizing me only after being turned away. Moments when I pictured myself repeating her own words back to her. "You don't belong here. Leave. Don't come back." Those fantasies felt satisfying for exactly 5 seconds. Then they always left me feeling strangely empty. Pain rarely becomes healing simply because it's returned. I picked up the framed photograph from my bookshelf. The fishing picture. Dad and I. Both smiling. I looked at it one last time before placing it back on the shelf. Then I walked toward the conference room. Through the glass wall, I could see her sitting alone. Her hands rested tightly together. She looked nervous. That was new. My mother had never been nervous when I was growing up. She had always sounded certain. Certain she was right. Certain she knew best. Certain criticism produced excellence. Now uncertainty sat quietly beside her. I opened the door. She stood immediately. "Thank you for seeing me." She offered a polite smile. Then looked at me carefully. For just a second, I wondered if she recognized me. She didn't. 10 years changes people. I no longer wore my hair the same way. The frightened 24-year-old who had left her house carrying one backpack had become a confident executive in a tailored navy suit. My glasses were different. My posture was different. Even my voice had changed. She extended her hand. My name is Susan Carter. I shook it gently. I know. She looked surprised. Oh, has someone already explained my situation? Please. I gestured toward the chair. Tell me what's happened. She sat down slowly. For several moments she searched for the right words. Finally she spoke. My husband has been very ill. Dad. My heart tightened. 3 years ago he retired. She swallowed. Last winter he was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. I listened without interrupting. The insurance covered some treatments. She looked down. But not all of them. She removed a folder from her purse. Medical invoices. Prescription costs. Hospital statements. Every page carried numbers. Large numbers. Our savings are gone. She paused. We sold the second car. Another pause. We refinanced the house. She looked embarrassed. It still wasn't enough. I quietly turned the pages. There was more. Michael. My brother's name appeared in another document. She noticed where my eyes stopped. My son. Her voice broke. He invested everything into a business that failed. So Michael had fallen. Not morally. Financially. He lost his house. He and his family are living in a rental. She quickly added, he wants to help. I know he does. But he simply can't. For the first time in the meeting, she looked directly into my eyes. I've spent months asking banks, charities, private lenders. No one will approve the amount we need. She hesitated. Someone at the hospital mentioned your company has a community foundation that sometimes helps families during medical emergencies. I nodded slowly. We do. I know this is a lot to ask. She took a shaky breath. But my husband is a good man. That sentence almost unraveled me. Because she was right. He was. He doesn't deserve to lose everything after working his entire life. I looked down at the paperwork again. Then quietly asked, how much do you need? She answered without hesitation. $280,000. The room became silent. Not because of the amount. Because I could have approved that figure with a single signature. 10 years earlier, $143 had determined whether I had somewhere to sleep. Life has a strange sense of proportion. I closed the folder. Then I asked the question that mattered most. Why did you choose this company? She smiled sadly. They told me the CEO believes in second chances. I looked at her for several seconds. Then asked one final question. Have you ever needed a second chance yourself? She frowned. I don't understand. You will. I stood. Walked to the wall beside the conference table. Hanging there was a large framed photograph from the opening of our headquarters. Hundreds of employees stood together. In the center, I was cutting the ribbon. She followed my gaze. Her eyes searched the picture. Then stopped. Her face lost all color. She looked at the photograph. Then at me. Then back again. Her lips parted. No sound came out. Very quietly. Almost as if speaking to herself. She whispered, Oz Emily. I nodded once. Yes. Nothing else. No dramatic speech. No raised voice. Just one word. For several long seconds, she simply stared at me. It was the kind of silence that cannot be rushed. Her breathing became uneven. She looked at the photograph again, searching for some sign that she had misunderstood. There wasn't one. The woman sitting across from me wasn't the receptionist. Wasn't an assistant. Wasn't a stranger. I was the daughter she had ordered to leave forever. Her hands began to tremble. She stopped. Tried again. I didn't. Another pause. I didn't recognize you. I know. You've. She looked around the office. You've done all this. With a lot of help from people who believed in me. She lowered her eyes. For the first time in my life, my mother looked uncertain about every word she was about to say. I'm sorry. The sentence was barely audible. Years ago, I imagined hearing those words would erase everything. It didn't. They mattered. But they didn't rewrite the past. I remained quiet. She wiped at her eyes. I thought. She shook her head. I honestly thought pushing you harder would make you stronger. I know. I wasn't trying to destroy your confidence. I know. I believed if I lowered my expectations. She stopped herself. No, she whispered. That's not true. She looked directly at me. The truth is I didn't know how to be satisfied. The room was completely silent. She continued before I could respond. My father criticized everything I ever did. She gave a tired smile. I promised myself I'd raise successful children. Another pause. I didn't realize I was repeating him. That sentence landed differently. Not because it excused her. Because it explained her. There is a difference between understanding someone's behavior and pretending it caused no harm. I thought I was building resilience. She laughed bitterly. I was building distance. Tears rolled quietly down her face. I kept waiting for you to come home. I kept waiting for you to realize I deserved to stay. Neither of us spoke. She nodded slowly. I know. She covered her face with both hands. I've replayed that night 1,000 times. I believe you. I wanted to call. Then why didn't you? She answered immediately. Pride. One word. No excuses. No blaming anyone else. Just truth. I kept thinking. She looked ashamed. That if I called first it would mean I had failed. I almost smiled sadly. You were my mother. I know. I was supposed to call because I missed you. Not because I wanted to win. She nodded again. I know. Another long silence settled over the room. Finally, I asked the question I had carried for 10 years. When you called me the biggest disappointment you'd ever raised. My voice remained calm. Did you mean it? She closed her eyes. At that moment, she swallowed. I believed I did. The honesty hurt. But it also mattered. Then she looked at me with tears still in her eyes. Now, she shook her head slowly. The greatest disappointment of my life wasn't raising you. It was failing you. I took a slow breath. For years I had imagined this conversation. In every version inside my head. Someone cried. Someone apologized. Someone won. Real life didn't feel like winning. It felt like two people, finally telling the truth after a decade of silence. She looked toward the folder of medical bills. I understand if you refuse. I deserve that. I looked at the papers. Then back at her. No. She frowned. No. You don't deserve revenge. She blinked. You deserve responsibility. I pressed the intercom on the table. My assistant, please. A few seconds later, Sarah entered with a notebook. Yes, Ms. Carter. I slid the folder toward her. Contact our community foundation. She nodded. I want Mr. Daniel Carter's medical case reviewed immediately. Yes, and if everything checks out. I looked once at my mother. Approved the full amount. Sarah looked surprised for only a second before writing it down. Today. She gathered the folder and quietly left the room. The door closed again. My mother stared at me as though she couldn't understand what had just happened. You. Her voice cracked. You're helping us. I'm helping Dad receive medical treatment. And me. I thought carefully before answering. I'm choosing not to become the person who hurt me. Fresh tears filled her eyes. I don't deserve you. No, I said gently. But kindness isn't a reward system. She cried openly now. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Like someone mourning 10 years that could never be recovered. After several minutes she stood. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. I answered honestly. Forgiveness isn't a single decision. It's something people practice. She nodded. I understand. She walked toward the door. Then stopped. Without turning arrow.